Good morning. It's good to be with you all again. It's always good to be here. I've preached here at Highland Oaks a handful of times over the last 5, 6, 7 years, and it is always such a welcome experience to come back and see familiar faces and to reconnect with old friends. I love the partnership and the friendship that I have with Pat, and that we have been able to work together on this series just a bit and coordinate the sermons that we were preaching at each other's place. I think is a really good thing. As you know, I was originally scheduled to preach this message here last week. You had some issues, and so Pat was here and I was over there, so I preached this message at Preston Road last week, and after I preached it, they said, why don't you just go to Highland Oaks next week? Just get out of here. We want to hear something other than that. And it is true. This is a heavy message. It's a bit difficult to deliver, and I would imagine it's even more difficult at points today for you to hear, because we are talking about anger and how Psalm 137, and I would invite you to turn to your Bibles there if you would, how Psalm 137 is one example in the scriptures of how we can deal with and express our anger. And you might think at this point, this is an odd choice, an odd topic to talk about in the midst of the season of Advent, when we're preparing to celebrate Jesus' first coming while also looking forward to his next coming. But as I'm sure you're well aware, there is a lot of anger in the world today. We live in an amazingly angry world. There's global outrage over what groups like ISIS and Boko Haram and others are doing to spread terror, now not just throughout the world, but in our own country. There's Christian outrage. And I'm not just talking about the color of the coffee cups at Starbucks. I personally don't know a single Christian who is actually upset at the lack of Christmas decor on the holiday cups at Starbucks. I know a lot of Christians who are outraged at the phantom outrage that I didn't know about, but I didn't see anybody really angry at coffee cups. But I do know a lot of Christians who are angry right now. Angry at the way it seems that our culture has moved on from traditional Christian morals and values and virtues. And they feel like they're no longer living in the world they recognize, and it's caused this great well of anger inside them. And some of them take their anger to social media and say amazingly nasty, negative things online about our country, our world, other people, their enemies. And while I don't always agree with what they say or how they say it, I totally understand where the anger comes from. Because we're living in a world that is changing. And all change involves loss. And all loss has to be grieved. And one of the stages of grief is anger. And so I know there's a lot of anger about the way our world is changing. You may have brought with you today some of your personal outrage over the way someone has hurt you. It could be an ex-spouse who betrayed you. It could be a business partner who misled you. It could be someone who was an authority figure in your life that took advantage of or abused you in some way, and you're angry about it. And something inside of you has said, now don't be angry. Don't show your anger. You need to let go of your anger, and you try to, but you can't. And so you're sitting here this morning seething, trying to pretend that you're not really angry, but your heart is boiling with rage over what has been done to you or what has been done to someone else that you know or love or care about. And so the question this morning is what do we do with our anger? And Psalm 137 provides one possible option. Let's read it. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. This is a psalm, a prayer, a song written from the perspective of Jewish musicians who are living in exile in Babylon after Jerusalem fell to the Babylonian army in 587, 586 BC. And these musicians have taken their harps and they've hung them up on trees because they don't need them anymore. Because they cannot, they will not sing while living in a foreign land. How could they possibly sing joyful songs from back home while living in Babylon? And their hearts are broken. And they're weeping, not only because they're not where they're supposed to be, but also because their captors, even worse, their tempters, keep asking for a song. Hey, sing us one of your songs. Hey, well, isn't there one of the songs about how good your God is? Why don't you sing us one of those songs? Don't you have a song in your songbook about how faithful God is? Why don't you sing one of those songs? Don't you have a song about how God would never let anything bad happen to you? Sing us one of those. We want to hear one of those songs. This is also something the Nazis did to the Jewish prisoners in concentration camps during World War II. They forced them to sing their ancestral songs of joy while in captivity, while they were pointing a gun at them. So you can feel in the first 6 verses of this psalm, you can feel the heartbreak and the pain and the humiliation, the desperation. They're not where they belong. They just want to go back home. Oh, if we could just go back and sing our songs in Jerusalem. And at this point, it feels more like just something that someone who's really hurting and really disappointed would say. And then comes the anger. Verse 7. Remember, Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down, they cried. Tear it down to its foundations. And daughter Babylon, doomed to destruction. Happy are those who repay you according to what you have done to us. Happy are those who seize your infants and dash them against the rocks. One writer has said the opening lines of this song are some of the most beautiful, most poetic in all the scriptures, and the last line of this psalm is perhaps the most ugly in all the scriptures. It's a prayer against the Babylonians and the Edomites, the two people or two groups of people that the psalmist holds responsible for his misery. And what starts out as a lament, this complaint about how miserable they are in Babylon, quickly turns to this plea for vengeance. Do to them what they have done to us. It seems almost to come out of nowhere. It's the sudden outburst of rage. Gotcha. That makes me angry. It's the sudden outburst of rage. It's an expression of intense hatred for their enemies. And its graphic imagery, especially that last line, which I'll try not to repeat too often with little ears in the room, reminds us of the brutality of ancient warfare. When armies would surround a village or a city and wipe everyone out, every man, woman, and child gone. The sentiment behind this plea for vengeance is that the psalmist wants his enemies and their descendants to be wiped off the face of the earth. Cut down their family tree, burn it so that it never bears fruit again. This is the ultimate curse, the ultimate call for judgment in the ancient world. May my enemy's family, may my enemy's people, may my enemy's tribe be no more. I want them gone. And if you've never read Psalm 137 before, if this is the first time you've ever heard it read in church, you have every right to be offended, every right to be shocked. Dash them against the rock. Is this really in the Bible? This is a prayer? Is this the kind of prayer that God endorses, that God would encourage, that God listens to? This psalm poses all kinds of problems for those of us who take the teachings of Jesus seriously, doesn't it? Because what did Jesus say? Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you and forgive those who sin against you. And he said, let the little children come to me. Dash them against the rocks. How does this prayer fit into the life and teachings of Christ? It's tempting to do what Eugene Peterson calls a psalmectomy on this part of the Bible. Can we just cut this one out of the Bible? Not literally, but mentally. And let's just agree that we will never read this out loud in church again. And that you have permission to skip it in your daily Bible reading. Let's pretend it's not in there. Some of you may even be a bit unhappy with me this morning because I brought it to your attention, and during the holiday season, no less, our favorite time of the year to pretend. And the truth is, I'm not sure why I picked it. When I was listing different psalms that I thought would work in this series, and I began to explain to others, like, here's what I want to talk about. Everybody gave me the same look, and after I had decided, yeah, I'm preaching on this psalm, I started trying to talk myself out of it, and every time I tried to brainstorm all the reasons I needed to not preach from this psalm, I came away more convinced than ever that I had to talk about it. It's one of the questions we can ask when a passage of Scripture, a psalm or a prayer, offends our modern civilized sensibilities. One of the questions we can ask, in addition to what does it say, it's pretty obvious what this one says. One of the questions we can ask is, okay, why has this been included in the Scriptures in the first place? Because somebody made a choice at some point. There was a group of people under the guidance of the Holy Spirit who read this prayer, looked at each other, and said, yeah, let's keep it in. Let's preserve this one for future generations. Because they may need it someday. Need it? Need it for what? Well, we might need it when we encounter an evil that defies explanation. Because this prayer is beyond moralism. Moralism would have us believe that basically there are very few victims in the world. That if something bad happens to you, if you find yourself in trouble, if you end up losing a war, somewhere along the way you had it coming. And this is repayment for something wrong that you did. Just do to us what they did to them. But this psalm points beyond moralism. How could anyone deserve this? How could this be a just repayment for anything that anyone has done? There is a kind of evil in the world that's beyond moralism and is beyond explanation. People do horrible things to each other, not because they deserve it, but because evil is at work in the world. And so we might need it someday. Need it for when our hearts are broken by this inexplicable evil. Because one thing Psalm 137 will not let us do is minimize the immensity of evil in the world and the havoc evil can wreak in our world. It will not let us look away from the victims, from those who have experienced terrible brutality at the hands of those who do evil. It won't let us look away from their experience. It won't let us ignore it. It forces us to confront what evil is doing in our world. And even though you might say today, I would never pray this prayer, at the very least it invites you this morning to see the world from the perspective of those who can pray it. Happy or blessed is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. How angry, how hurt, how humiliated, how broken would a person have to be to pray this prayer? What kind of atrocities would a person have to witness to call down this kind of curse on an enemy? When I was preparing for this message, I came across an insightful blog post from a young blogger who confessed that he was initially offended by the hashtag #YesAllWomen that was on Twitter. You can still find it on there if you want to look for it. #YesAllWomen was a hashtag generated in response to the 2014 shootings in Santa Barbara. You may not remember that particular shooting. Sadly, they're hard to keep track of. But in this particular one, there was a young man in California who went out and targeted women because he felt they were mistreating him. And in response to this shooting, women all over the world began to tell their stories of the way they had been mistreated, the way they had been abused, the way they had been discriminated against and objectified and taken advantage of by men in their lives. And they attached the hashtag, #YesAllWomen. Yes, this is an experience that all women have had. And he said in his writing, he said he was initially defensive because no, not all men are this way. And he thought that maybe the anger these women were expressing toward men was a bit over the top, an overreaction. And then he started reading the stories. And they broke his heart. And he quickly realized not only was their anger justified, but also he was not angry enough on their behalf. Psalm 137 is more than a prayer. It's a description of the way our world is. Not just was in ancient times, but is today. It's not just a reminder of the brutality of ancient warfare. It's a reminder that such brutality exists in our world today. There are people in our world who are doing this to each other. There are people in our world who are so hurt, so broken, so oppressed, so devastated by evil, and so powerless against it, they feel like this is the only prayer they can pray. It's their only option. It's their only form of power. And this psalm accurately depicts their anger towards their enemies. And maybe it accurately depicts your anger as well this morning. Anger you feel towards someone who has hurt you or hurt someone you love. Anger at the injustices you see in the world around you and on the news. Honestly, how can we not be angry at the evil deeds we see perpetrated in our world, many of them in the name of religion? How can we not be angry? The question is not, is our anger justified? The question is, are we angry enough at what evil is doing in our world? And if we are angry, what do we do with it? And this is where Psalm 37 can help us. 137 can help us. Because the first thing it does is it gives us permission to express our unedited anger. Unedited. It allows us to give voice to our pain, not pretend it's not there, not act like everything's okay, not act like, oh, it wasn't as bad as you might think it was. No. This is permission to get it all out. To take what is boiling inside of your heart and write it down and speak it or sing it or pray it, not hold on to it, not press it down, but let it out. Unedited anger. But it also teaches us to express our unedited anger to God. And this is the critical distinction. This is a prayer about the psalmist's enemies. He's talking about them and what they've done, but it's directed to God. And there is a huge difference between directing your anger to God and taking action on your anger when you see your enemies. The psalmist is not taking his anger to the streets, taking his anger to his enemies. He's not going out and rounding up babies. He's taking his anger and giving it to God. He's naming the evil and the evildoer, and he's asking God to do something about it. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And he trusts God with his anger, and he trusts God with his enemies. Walter Brueggemann, Old Testament scholar who was commenting on this psalm, said, essentially paraphrasing here, he said, it takes a lot of faith to entrust your most precious hatreds to God and believe he will do something about them. This psalm teaches us to direct our unedited anger to God. It also models for us the first couple of steps in the long process of forgiveness. Lewis Smedes has written that there are 4 stages to forgiveness, and you really have to go through all 4 of them to really forgive someone. The first stage is we hurt. Someone hurts us and we feel that hurt. The second stage is we hate. That in response to the hurt, we feel hate. It's a natural response. And then after we hurt and we hate, we heal. And then we come together. There's the possibility of reconciliation. Now, there is a lot of things that have to happen in between the initial hurt and the coming together if there ever is to be a reconciliation. We can't skip the hurt and the hate part. This psalm, part of what it does is it shows us and teaches us not to forgive too quickly. And by that I mean not to pretend we've forgiven someone when we really haven't. We can't jump straight from, oh, you hurt me and I just forgive you. We have to be honest about the hurt. We have to be honest about the hate. Direct it and give it to God. Let go of it. Then there can be healing that comes to our heart. Maybe the greatest value this psalm has for us this morning, especially during the season of Advent, is that it points to a kind of evil at work in our world that is so serious, only God is qualified to deal with it. Human beings cannot solve the problem of evil by ourselves. That's not to say that we shouldn't take action to protect the weak or ease the suffering of others or restrain those who are hell-bent on doing evil in the world. It's not to say we just sit back and watch evil unfold in the world. But anytime we take action, we do so with fear and trembling and deep humility. Because history has taught us that the problem of evil cannot be solved with an army or a missile strike or a piece of legislation. In fact, it seems even when good people try to do something about evil, the temptation and the door is open for them to do evil themselves. It is very hard to defeat the monster of evil without becoming a monster. And so there is this kind of evil at work in the world today that is best entrusted to God, who takes it so seriously, he came down to earth to deal with it himself. Jesus came into a world in which the people of God were ruled over by a puppet king who was willing to kill every baby boy in Bethlehem to protect his throne. He came into a world in which the Roman army dealt with rebellion by encircling a city and completely destroying it. Jesus came into a world in which the people of God were praying this kind of prayer about their enemies, in which the people of God hated the evil deeds of their evil enemies and were begging God to do something about it. And God responded. But he didn't respond with an army. He responded with a baby in a manger and an innocent man on the cross and a risen Lord standing outside an empty tomb and a church, a community of imperfect people who imitate the Lord's example and obey his teachings. Jesus came and did battle with evil in the most unexpected way. He didn't crush it. He identified with those who were being crushed by it. And he let it crush him on the cross so that he could triumph over it, making a spectacle of it as his Father raised him from the dead, demonstrating that evil has no power over God. But in fighting evil this way, he revealed the real enemy. He revealed the true source of evil and the true problem in the world. The real enemy is not the Romans. And it's not the religious leaders who conspired with the Romans to crucify Jesus. And it's not the Edomites or the Babylonians. It's not radical Islam. It's not atheists who don't want to hear Christmas music in public places. The Apostle Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, our battle is not against flesh and blood. People are not our enemy. Our battle is against the unseen forces of evil, the powers of darkness, the great Satan, the great adversary at work in our world, at work in those we call our enemies, but also at work in us. The line between good and evil is not drawn in between them and us. The line between good and evil is drawn straight down our hearts. And God's response to evil was the cross. God's response to evil was not to kill them so that we can be saved. His response to evil was to die for all of us. All of us. When it comes to evil, there is no them. There's only us. And this is one of the great mysteries of our faith. Evil is not a problem to be solved by human beings. It's a mystery to be grappled with. It's a burden to be cried out against. It's a malevolent force to be resisted, both out there and in here. And it's an opportunity, an invitation to cry out, to put our trust in God as we express our anger and our pain. And so this morning, my brothers and sisters, may we join the psalmist who cries out against evil. May we cry out against humanity's true enemy that will kill and destroy and humiliate and oppress everything that is good in this world. And just as Jesus entrusted himself to his Father when he was overwhelmed with evil, may we trust our Father to deliver us from evil just as he delivered his Son. And until then, may we continue to cry out, to resist, but most of all, to trust. To keep trusting, to keep hoping, to keep waiting until that day when Christ comes and wipes evil off the face of the earth once and for all.